Hello, I'm Ket Manahan. Welcome to the Vote 2001 New Jersey Gubernatorial Debate. We're coming to you live from the New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark to bring you the two major party candidates in this year's governor's race. They are Democrat Jim McGreevey, Republican Bret Schundler. A panel of reporters will be asking the candidates questions. They are Aron, NJN News senior political correspondent, Alfred Doblin, editorial page editor with the Herald News, Suzette Parmley, Philadelphia Inquirer State House correspondent, and Herb Jackson, Deputy State House Bureau Chief for the Bergen Record. We'll also be taking questions from audience members at our NJN Trenton studios and at the Richard Stockton College of New Jersey in Pomona. Here are some of the rules for this debate. The candidates are prohibited from using props of any kind. I will stop the candidates if there are any violations of this rule. Time limits will be strictly enforced, and I will ask our audience here in Newark to refrain from any display of support or otherwise during the program. We begin with opening statements from each of the candidates. The order was predetermined. We begin with Bret Schundler, who has 90 seconds. Mr. Schundler.
Our lives were changed on September 11th. I was in Israel to show its support when the world just stopped. The first thing I did was try to reach my wife Lynn and our children, tried unsuccessfully for hours before succeeding. You remember how it was. Those terrorists hurt us, but they will not defeat us. They may be willing to die to kill others, but we saw Americans who were willing to die to save others. Our nation, under the leadership of my friend President Bush, will triumph and the world will be made safer. In the meanwhile, we will work with Governor Pataki and Tom Ridge to integrate our state police into national and regional intelligence gathering efforts so that we can defeat those terrorists before they strike and keep our people safe. Additionally, we will reform state programs so that we can do more while spending less and cut taxes to revive our economy. Controlling spending and cutting taxes is critical now. With the economy slowing, we have to cut taxes to put people back to work. And we have to cut property taxes, especially for seniors, or some will lose their homes. My opponent and I have different philosophies. Almost all of his campaign proposals are for increased spending. Almost all of my campaign proposals are for reforming the way we spend the money we already have. His wild spending would cost the state budget twice as much as my tax cuts. And if you want higher taxes, you should vote for him. If you want lower taxes, you should vote for me.
Mr. McGreevey, your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Kent, my wife Dina, and my family. For me, this race fundamentally is about middle-class New Jersey. The people who get up every morning, work hard, play by the rules. They want a government that works for them. And again, 4 years ago when I announced for governor, we had the highest property taxes in the nation, the highest auto insurance rates, and now our schools are overcrowded, less space, traffic. We need a governor who's going to work for the people that government ought to work for. And that's middle-class New Jersey. That's what I did as mayor of the township of Woodbridge, where I was reelected with 83% of the vote. We need to get this education piece right, particularly public education. We need to ensure that every third grade child can read, and read well. For teachers who can't teach, we need to get them out of the classroom. We need to set higher standards for teachers and principals. And on auto insurance, 7 years in a row, the highest auto insurance rates in the nation. My frustration today is that we have 600,000 people driving around uninsured. The truth today in New Jersey is good drivers pay for bad drivers, good drivers pay for uninsured drivers, and good drivers pay for fraud. We need a governor who's going to tackle this issue. And on property taxes, since 1992, property taxes have gone up by $4 billion. We need a governor who's going to provide real reform and real relief. And lastly, if you look at all the waste and mismanagement of the past 8 years, where the Parsons are $500 million, the overruns in Easy Pass, the waste and mismanagement, we need a governor who's going to get it done, make the right decisions for the right reasons.
Thank you, candidates. We're now going to move to questions from our panel of reporters. We begin with Aron, whose question goes to Mr. McGreevey. Michael?
Mayor McGreevey, Mr. Schundler made reference to September 11th in his opening statement. If you had been governor on September 11th, what would you have done?
Well, one, I'd like to applaud the actions of Governor DeFrancesco. I think he did and set forth a clear, reasonable plan and moved efficiently. I'd like to congratulate also our state police, our National Guard. I think New Jersey had an excellent response, but we can always do better. One of the things that I think is so important is that we focus on terrorism the way we focused on organized crime during the 60s. And under the rubric of the Attorney General, I would have Assistant Attorney General to coordinate a counterterrorism strike force, to marshal all the resources of municipal police, county police, state police, and work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And then also, we need to grapple with the problem of rent-a-cops at our airports. Problems still exist. We need to professionalize our airports to ensure that our families, our children are safe. But I believe New Jersey responded well. I believe we can always improve. Part of that's having a good plan, preparing for that plan, and having emergency preparation.
Mr. Schundler.
I think our state police, our National Guard, all of our emergency service personnel did an outstanding job, and I commend Governor DeFrancesco for his actions leading legislation through our chambers, both parties supporting them, giving us the resources to prepare to meet an even greater threat in the future. One of the things that I think we have to do also is advocate with our national government to make sure that we have the ability here to intercept threats. Up until 2 years ago, we had a fighter intercept group in Atlantic City that would have been able to intercept the second plane before it hit the World Trade Center. We have to make sure we get that fighter group back. It's not the National Guard here that made the decision, it was the Washington government that cut our military. We need to have that National Guard capability in this state to intercept a plane before it strikes.
Your rebuttal, Mr. McGreevey.
Well, one of my frustrations is that Mr. Schundler deemed it appropriate to criticize the state police, to criticize the National Guard. Part of being a responsible leader is stepping to the plate, is understanding the importance and the significance of the role. I understand what happened that day. Most importantly, the state police gave their all. I think the responsibility of a leader is to bring us together, to understand a common mission, and ensure that New Jersey moves forward.
Follow up, Michael.
Mr. Schundler, since Mayor McGreevey raised it, would you respond to the notion that you deemed it appropriate to criticize the state police and the National Guard?
I spoke with 6 reporters about a state defense plan and emergency response plan. In none of those conversations with reporters did any of the other 5 reporters hear anything I said as representing any criticism of the state's response. There was only one reporter for the New York Times, not typically a friendly reporter to conservatives like myself, who heard it as a criticism. We talked about how we can step up our capability to respond to an attack in the future. We didn't criticize the response of the state relative to the World Trade Center attack.
Time is up. Alfred Doblin, your question for Mr. Schundler.
Mr. Schundler, New Jersey has become somewhat infamous for racial profiling. Mm-hmm. September 11th has presented new challenges to state law enforcement officials. Attorney General John Farmer has said there'd be zero tolerance for any bias crimes. As governor, how will you protect the civil rights of Muslims and Arabs living in New Jersey while working with federal law enforcement officials trying to apprehend possible terrorists?
I don't think you have to, in any way, shape, or form, circumscribe someone's civil rights to keep our people safe. If you think about how we did successfully combat organized crime in this state some years back, it was through giving broadened powers to our state police to do wiretapping of suspects, not individuals of any particular ethnic background, suspects. And because they were able to do that wiretapping, because they were able to see who these individuals were talking to and map out a network of contacts, they were able to begin to see the entire criminal structure of organized crime, so that when they made arrests, they were able to arrest all at one time. Now, it's easier to get a wiretap for organized criminals than it is for terrorists because of enabling legislation which specifically made it possible to get that wiretap easier. We have to provide those kind of tools in the fight against terrorism, and we will be able, through significantly increased intelligence gathering, to arrest terrorists before they strike.
Your response, Mr. McGreevey.
Well, racial profiling is wrong. It's not only illegal, it's immoral. As governor, I would ask the state legislature to clearly pass a law setting forth penalties for racial profiling. And I'm determined, for the next colonel of the state police, to ensure that police management ensures that no one commits an act of racial profiling, whether it's a stop, whether it's a questioning, or whether it's a consent search. But I believe there's a distinction between racial profiling and legitimate police practices. And I will ensure that New Jersey stops the practice of racial profiling, but that also we have a state police and municipal departments that protect the safety and welfare of our lives and of our families.
Rebuttal?
One of the things I think we can do is we can very closely monitor our police to make sure that they are respecting civil rights. Now, we know almost all of our officers are, but it's the singular example of one individual who might do wrong that then tarnishes the image of the entire department. Now, I've called for a suspension of consent searches on the Turnpike until we have our monitoring system in place. That will be in place soon. But Jim McGreevey wasn't even willing to ask for a suspension temporarily of consent searches. And that, I'm trying to understand why he would not at least consider that.
And time is up. A follow-up, yes.
Mr. McGreevey, would you like to respond to your position on consent searches?
Yes. I think there's a difference between stopping racial profiling and stopping consent searches. I said clearly I would stop racial profiling, pass a law, and ensure that management abides by that law. But a consent search is permitted in all 50 jurisdictions in the United States of America. There's one critical case, the Cucamonga case, where as a result of a consent search, someone found explosives in the back of a car. Mr. Schundler, I believe, would ban a legitimate police practice, which I think is wrong. We need to ban racial profiling, whether it's the stop, whether it's the question, but not interfere with legitimate police
Suzette
practice.
Parmley, your question for Mr. McGreevey.
Mayor McGreevey, the downturn in the national economy and the added pressures resulting from the September 11th attacks will force the next governor to make some tough choices. The state is posting less than expected revenues, and New Jersey lost nearly 23,000 jobs in the first 8 months alone. If faced with budget deficits, do you foresee tax cuts or a reduction in spending to balance New Jersey's books?
Great question. In addition, from my mother saying rosaries for a good economy, a couple of serious answers. One, we need to understand that we have to live within our means. My commitment is that we're not going to increase taxes, but we have to get tough. One, I said, cap the New Jersey Saver program for those earning over $200,000. We need to understand that we have to begin to pay down this debt, a debt that's tripled under the past 8 years. I also said we have to make government more efficient. Combine the Parkway, the Turnpike Authority, the Atlantic City Expressway. We have to achieve economies of scale. And third, we have to begin to refinance this debt, particularly agency debt. In 1992, the state debt was $4.8 billion. Next year, the state debt is going to be $18 billion. That's a heck of a nut. I believe not only do we have to refinance the debt, but level it out to ensure consistency for future governors.
Your response, Mr. Schundler.
We have a $22 billion state budget. And he said this year that he would have voted against that state budget because it includes, as he just restated right now, too much tax relief rebate money. Now, there's $22 billion worth of spending he could have cut, and he wasn't willing to cut any of the spending. All he's willing to cut is the tax relief rebate money. Now, he's been asked whether he would promise not to increase taxes. I've made that pledge, and I've said I will reform programs so we can get more done while spending less money, and we can lower taxes. But he's been unwilling even to promise not to increase taxes. In '97, when he ran for governor, he said that he would have a constitutional convention to increase income and sales taxes. And just yesterday, he reaffirmed his same interest in a constitutional convention to do that.
Your rebuttal, Mr. McGreevey.
Well, after what happened on September 11th, I think it's irresponsible for a government official to say under any circumstances to make that kind of commitment. The difference is I think we've been rational and reasonable. Mr. Schundler has made $3 billion worth of promises. $3 billion worth of promises. $600 million to finance private schools, $215 million to take down the tolls, $800 million for one of his income tax reduction schemes, another $414 million in property tax, $80 million retirement. The point is this, I believe government has to live within its means.
Next question for Mr. Schundler, please.
Let's talk about tolls.
Right.
The Garden State Parkway collects about $200 million a year in tolls, and it only spends about $40 million on actually collecting that. The rest of the money goes for maintenance, reserves, and to build the highway and improve and maintain it. You've said eliminating the tolls would be, quote, a piece of cake.
Right.
Can you tell us where you would get the $95 million that currently goes for maintenance, the $60 million that currently goes to pay off the $650 million in debt that sits on that roadway right now?
Yeah, the bottom line is we have been averaging about $1.9 billion per year in new revenue to the state. And are you asking me whether we can get less than 10% of the new money coming into the state and commit it to getting rid of the parkway tolls instead of spending every new dollar that sales and income taxes bring into the state for new spending? I want to cut taxes. And there's no better way to cut taxes as a first step than the parkway tolls. They actually bring in about $185 million. And again, if you consider the fact that you have all those collection costs, it's only a fraction of that you actually have being usable. So if you cut this particular tax, on the one hand, you get to give $185 million back to the people for a lot less cost to the Treasury, whereas usually if you cut taxes, you have to give $1 back for, you have $1 cost to the Treasury for $1 you give back. But here you also get a nicer road to drive. Mostly, folks, in real life, you have to pay more to get something nicer. Here you pay less and you get something nicer. Now that's a deal. You'll also have less air pollution. You'll have fewer accidents swerving for the easy pass lane.
Mr. McGreevey.
You know what people want from the next governor? Respectfully, a governor who tells the truth, who's straightforward. I can't get rid of the tolls in 9 months. Respectfully, neither can Mr. Schundler. The difference is I'm saying it. Was the acting governor, DeFrancesco, set forth a very thoughtful plan for 10 years. I believe 10 years is too long. So that's why I've talked about merging the Parkway, the Turnpike, the Atlantic City Expressway. But I believe at the end of the day, people want a governor who's going to be honest with them. And when you look to losing $200 million worth of revenue, $600 million of debt, Mr. Schundler can't even get the permits within 9 months. I believe what's most important is that we have a governor who's honest. I'm going to get those tolls done, but I'm going to get them down in a reasonable period of time, less than 10 years. But most importantly, I'm telling you the truth of what New Jersey can do.
Mr. Schundler.
All the tolls do is create revenue. All you have to do is replace that revenue. The revenue they bring in, that's what pays for the bonds, Jim. You don't have to pay off the bonds. You just have to replace the revenue with money from the Treasury. And why can't you do it in 6 months, 9 months? Connecticut did it in 6 when they made the decision to do it. There's no reason we can't get these tolls down and get them right away. It just depends on your priority. When Governor Whitman cut taxes in her first year, she cut 2% of state revenues. This would equal less than 1/2 of 1%. It is a piece of cake, and there's no reason why if you can't do it in 6 months, he thinks he could do it in 10 years.
Herb, you have a follow-up.
Well, is the state going to assume the $650 million in debt? And if so, shouldn't the voters be asked to approve that debt, as you believe voters should approve new debt?
All the tolls provide is income. If the state treasury then says, we're going to cover those costs, that $130 million of net cost a year, which frankly, again, is 1/2 of 1% of revenues. It's a nice way to give people a much bigger tax cut for a much smaller amount of money to the state treasury. You'll service the debt, you'll take care of the road, you'll do everything that $130 million from the toll revenues was covering.
Michael, you'll lead off the second round, and your question goes to Mr. McGreevey.
Mayor McGreevey, in your stump speech, excuse me, you often say, 4 years ago, when I ran for governor against Governor Whitman, we had the highest auto insurance rates in the nation and the highest property taxes. We're still #1 in both. And you say that as a suggestion.
I'm glad
that
you're listening.
I listen, I hear it all the time.
And we're paying for it.
Would you pledge here tonight that if elected governor, and we're still #1 in auto insurance and property taxes after 4 years, that you would decline to run for re-election?
Michael, ultimately that's going to be the voters' decision, but I'm determined to get it done. Let me talk to you about auto insurance. My basic plan is that right now we have 600,000 people driving around uninsured. For a $1 premium, 15 cents of every dollar is fraud. I talked about a fraud prosecutor in 1997. To Governor Whitman's credit, we moved on it, but we haven't had the criminal penalties. We haven't had the criminal prosecutions. I believe it's long past time where we tackle those who are uninsured. I simply said, if you're driving an uninsured vehicle and you can't produce an auto insurance certificate, that car gets impounded. I believe I'm on the side of drivers. I've also said about the restoration of a public advocate. Right now, when there's a rate increase hearing, there are 2 people in the room, the Department of Insurance and the insurance company. I believe we need a public advocate in there arguing for our case. So I believe ultimately at the end of the day, if we take on fraud, if we take the uninsured driver, and we have an advocate representing our position, I'm confident we can level out, stabilize auto insurance
Your
rates.
60-second response, Mr. Schundler.
Now you asked about property taxes. I came in facing a huge deficit, equal to almost 40% of our revenues. We would have had to increase taxes 40% to cover that deficit if I didn't find creative ways to get spending down. We got spending down. We cut taxes instead. He came in and faced a deficit. He raised property taxes 59% in Woodbridge. And then look at his votes in the legislature. He was the only vote in the entire legislature against using the gross receipts franchise taxes for property tax relief. That was $3.7 billion of property tax relief, where he was the only vote, Republican or Democrat, against that property tax relief. And you think that anything he does is going to help the property taxpayer? When he voted, when he was the deciding vote for all of Florio's tax increases, that didn't help get property taxes down. Property taxes were rising even faster when the Democrats were in power than they've been in recent years when the Republicans have been cutting all other state taxes. We have an opportunity to reform our programs to make them more effective so that the state has the wherewithal to give more money to school districts and municipalities. He said that my school proposals would save $600 million. Now, $600 million is enough to reduce property taxes.
I have to stop you there for Mr. McGreevey's rebuttal.
You know, the reality is this. In Jersey City today, the average property tax bill is $1,785. In Woodbridge, the average bill is $771. Literally 2 people in Woodbridge don't pay what 1 person does in Jersey City. Let's look at the debt. In Jersey City, Mr. Schundler is $90 million above the debt limit. And everybody in the state of New Jersey should understand, in the past 3 years, all of the state contributed $1.2 billion to bail out his distressed city, to bail out his school district.
Time is up. Michael, a follow-up.
Mr. Schundler, Mayor McGreevey says he would impound the cars of uninsured motorists. Would you?
I think that can be done. I think the proposals he's made for car insurance are not even controversial. Those have been things that both Republicans and Democrats have been agreeing for a long time, to fight fraud more. But if you actually look at what has happened under the Republicans, we did actually get premiums down this last year. While Jim Florio was in office and he was there voting for his reforms, you saw car insurance rates rising fast. So we have seen a definite improvement, at least under the Republicans. But we're not going to get to where we want to be unless we fundamentally change the way we're doing things. He wants to do precisely what we've been doing in the past.
Alfred, your question goes to Mr. Schundler.
Mr. Schundler, the state Supreme Court ruling in Abbott versus Burke was supposed to raise the educational levels of 30 disadvantaged districts.
Right.
Yet one of the components of this ruling was to provide free preschool to all eligible 3- and 4-year-olds by this September. That didn't happen in all districts, notably in Passaic and Elizabeth. The state blames the districts, those districts are suing the state, yet the state controls the process, and those children still do not have preschool. As governor, what would you do to address the difficulties in implementing Abbott versus Burke?
Well, I think it's inherently difficult for any school district to create that many new schools in a single year. We're talking about schools for about 3,000 children. I think we can do that faster than anybody else, though. If you look at under the charter school legislation that I got passed with my friends and with the governor's assistance, we were able to get brand new schools created, and most of those were in less than a year. And we got those school buildings built without a single dollar in capital monies from the state or from local taxpayers. For instance, the Urban League in Jersey City is in a building that was built for it by a private developer with their own capital. They leased that building to the Urban League, which runs a charter school. When the mortgage is paid off, they're going to give it to the Urban League for $1. The Urban League, for less than half as much money as other schools are spending in Jersey City, is providing a better education. Those kids are scoring higher, even though these were kids who were struggling more coming in. And you're doing it for a fraction of the cost with no capital dollars whatsoever. And you got that school up and running in less than a year. Now, there are ways that I think we can, adopting the same.
Mr. McGreevey?
I strongly support charter schools. I was a co-sponsor of the legislation in the state Senate. The fundamental difference on education between me and Mr. Schundler is this. There are about 1.5 million children in primary and secondary schools. 1.3 million go to public schools, only 200,000 go to private schools. Mr. Schundler wants to take $600 million away from public education, weaken public education, and move, according to his statistics, about 80,000 children over to private schools. Ultimately, property taxpayers have to make up that $600 million, and he's not going to do a darn thing for the quality of public education. I believe, most importantly, we've got some great public school districts. We have also some that are failing. I want to say to every parent in the state of New Jersey, for those failing school districts, meet your new best friend. I'm going to ensure that public school works in every classroom in the state of New Jersey. That's where the over 1 million children are, and that's what we need to get done.
Your opportunity for rebuttal, Mr. Schundler.
The reality is that in the Abbott districts, they have increased state funding by multiples, as he even admitted before. We had 40% graduation rates 12 years ago when we had the state take over Jersey City. We have 40% graduation rates today after massive increases in spending and 12 years of state control. More spending is not going to solve the problem. What we have to do is use the money better. We have to have accountability. We have to have tenure reform. You have to have the money spent on the right priorities, not on bureaucracy. He's fighting the necessary reforms because he wants to keep the NJEA, the teachers union, happy.
Time is up. Suzette Parmley, your question for Mr. McGreevey.
Mayor McGreevey, I want to peek at what kind of leader you're going to be. In the military classic, The Art of War, a general possesses 5 virtues: wisdom, sincerity, courage, compassion, and discipline. Which of those 5 will best serve you in leading New Jersey in these uncertain times? And how have you honed that virtue in preparing for the state's highest office?
I guess guy sitting right in the front row taught me something about courage. My dad, Marine Corps drill instructor. One of the most important lessons of my life. I was about 12 years old. He set me on the edge of a bed. I thought I was in trouble. He pulled out the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. He read to me a letter from the Secretary of Navy to my grandfather, Michael McGreevey, an Irish Catholic immigrant, telling how my dad's older brother, James Edward McGreevey, how he died in Iwo Jima. He died getting shot up, hitting the beaches. My dad said to me, "This is the guy you're named after. Always do what's right, always understand the great country you live in, and try to live up to his name." I've been working hard at it ever since.
Mr. Schundler?
Folks, I agree that courage is incredibly important. And if you look at who is a model of courage to us, I think Jim's uncle was a model. So were those police officers and firefighters, again, who went into the World Trade Center, knowing that it may come down, but doing it because it was their duty and because they were committed to trying to save whatever lives they possibly could. That was an example of courage. All we're ever asked as political leaders is to maybe risk losing an election, to do the right thing to help people. Now, the different interest groups that are very active in Trenton, stymieing reform, have all endorsed Jim McGreevey. And to get those endorsements, he's told them that he'll give them everything they want, and you're the ones who are going to pay for it. You're the ones who are going to see your property tax bills go up, and your income tax bills go up, and your sales tax bills go up. His spending proposals, again, are worth 4 times as much as the tax cuts I've proposed. That is unaffordable in this budget, and that will increase your taxes. I said no to those groups. That's why they're not supporting me. But in Jersey City, by saying no to those groups, I was able to lower property taxes. In Woodbridge, you saw property taxes go through the roof. You didn't see
Mr.
services
McGreevey?
get better.
You know, Mr. Schundler calls police and fire special interest. I call them special heroes. They're the guys who ran into the building. They've endorsed me, and they're not supporting Mr. Schundler. You want to talk about special interest? With all due respect, Mr. Schundler, during the Republican primary, made a deal with the gun lobby. He said if a bill came to his desk permitting individuals to carry concealed weapons, he'd sign it. In his Christian Coalition questionnaire, he said that he would only appoint justices to the Supreme Court that were right to life. He would ban abortion even in the cases of rape and incest.
Time is up. Herb, your question goes to Mr. Schundler.
Next month in New York, it'll be illegal to talk on a handheld cell phone. Sorry to bring up more mundane issues, but although you will be able to still drive with a headset. As the most densely populated state in New Jersey, would you restrict driving while talking?
I just as soon take some time to see what actually happens from their experience if you actually see accidents go down. I think we don't have to be the first state to do everything. Let's go back to that gun question. You know, Jim McGreevey has been using all of his special interest money to lie about my record. I support New Jersey's gun laws. I have said time and again, I would not support changing them. I repeat, I would not support changing them. I was asked specifically on a television program whether I supported certain exemptions. I said I do. Those exemptions exist in the current law, and Jim McGreevey voted for them in 1990. So what a hypocrite. He's out there with these television ads saying I support exemptions that he voted for. I just want to know, Jim, do you now no longer believe that a trained security officer should be able to get a gun so that, by going to a judge and getting a judge's approval so that he can fulfill his duties? Do you not believe that a woman who's receiving death threats and can prove it in a court of law should be able to get a permit from a judge and get training and be able to defend herself if she can't afford a security guard?
Time is up.
You voted
Mr.
for those
McGreevey?
exemptions.
Brett, you can run, but you can't hide. These are statements that you made to the Philadelphia Inquirer, to the New York Times. I saw it on News Forum with Gabe Pressman.
Read the quotes.
These are the quotes. We'll make them available. But let me get back to the question. The point is, my driving record leaves a lot to be desired with or without a phone. I believe that New Jersey should not allow handheld phones. If it's on the dashboard, if it's a speaker, it's okay. But I've seen too many accidents. So let me be clear. I'm the guy who's willing to say no to concealed weapons and say no to handheld phones.
Mr. Schundler, you have an opportunity here for rebuttal.
The reason he did not quote what I said, because what I said is exactly what I just told you I said. Now, he's out there with those advertisements contorting everything. And he won't hold up a quotation and say this is what he said, because it would sound awfully reasonable if he did. He voted for the same exemptions I said I thought are reasonable. And now he's attacking me. That is the height of hypocrisy. He hasn't said whether he no longer believes in those exemptions, because he would feel that you would reject him if he did, because they're such reasonable exemptions. He has
Time is up.
Can I have an opportunity to read his quote?
No, because time is up. But we are now going to, candidates and reporters, move to a series of questions from our audience members who are watching this debate in our Trenton studios. We're also going to go in a little bit to Pomona in Atlantic County, where we'll be taking questions. But first to Marie DeNoia, who is standing by with the audience in Trenton. Marie?
Good evening, Kent, and we will turn to the audience right now for that first question. If you would stand. Tell us your name.
My name is Pat Benjamin, and I'm from Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
And tell us your question.
I'd like the question to be answered by both candidates, and it's a two-part question. What do you believe are the two main weaknesses within the New Jersey education system, and how would you improve these areas of weakness?
You both have an opportunity to answer, but Mr. McGreevey is first.
One of the major weaknesses that I'm concerned about is the fact that for third grade children, we have about 800 public schools in the state of New Jersey, where literally 30% of the third grade children can't read at third grade reading level. I believe there's nothing more important than ensure that we open that child's mind to the world of knowledge. I am determined that we boost third grade literacy standards. Everything indicates that if we lose that child at third grade, we're never going to get him or her back at fourth grade, fifth grade, or sixth grade. So third grade literacy is going to be a driving concern for me in the state of New Jersey. And second is accountability. We have some of the best school districts in the nation, and they're going to be continued to be monitored. But for those school districts that are failing, we need benchmarks of accountability. We need a governor who's going to work with parents, with principals, to ensure that we meet those benchmarks. And I say to those failing school districts, to those 30 Abbott school districts, meet your new best friend. I am going to be all up.
Mr. Schundler, your turn.
Almost everything that Jim McGreevey has proposed is exactly what we've been doing all along. The accountability he talks about will still be accountability to politicians who are concerned about their next election more than anything else. I've always talked about trying to have parental accountability, because parents love their children. They're not worried about keeping some organized interest group happy so they can get its endorsement for the next election. Now, I wrote the legislation that was introduced by Dick LaRosa and Jack Ewing and became our charter school legislation. That was then implemented, and we had 10 charter schools in my city. One I founded myself, spending about half as much money as other public schools. It took the children who came in with the lowest reading scores in the whole system, and now their scores have gone through the roof. These children are doing dramatically better for far less spending. We can take those same ideas, we can put them in our public schools, and we will see our children do better all throughout our public system. The key is parental accountability. In schools of choice, whether you're talking about Catholic schools or charter schools, nobody gets, the schools don't get a single dollar unless they make parents want to give them their child. So they are accountable to parents, and they do the right thing with the money they get.
Mr. McGreevey, you have a brief rebuttal.
The point is this. I was a co-sponsor of the law for charter schools. I fervently believe in charter schools. I believe in public choice. The difference between me and Mr. Schundler, with all due respect, Mr. Schundler says he wants to take $600 million out of public education and finance private schools. I believe it won't work. The nonpartisan Office of Legislative Services of the state of New Jersey says his numbers don't add up. The New York Times, the Bergen Record, the Trenton Times, everyone says that all his program will do will weaken public education, and charter schools are part of public education and cost property taxpayers dollars.
And we're going to go back to Marie DeNoia in Trenton for our next studio audience question. Marie?
Okay, sir, tell us your name.
Bill Ritzler, Pittman, Gloucester County.
And tell us your question.
My question concerns sprawl. Sprawl costs New Jersey residents in many ways, including time, tax dollars, and diminished quality of life. It continues despite numerous state and local initiatives to control it. As governor, what resources would you allocate to make development more cost-effective and to help communities that wish to limit growth?
Mr. Schundler, you're up first.
I'm so glad you asked this question. As you know, I want to get rid of the Mount Laurel decision. He supports maintaining the Mount Laurel decision. This is a decision that has not created much affordable housing. Only 27,000 units of affordable housing have been created in the 20 years that it's existed. I got 2,600 units of affordable housing built in Jersey City without any Mount Laurel obligation whatsoever. And that's almost 10% of what the state created under that law. What that law has done is create sprawl. It's given builders the opportunity to go and cut down trees or pave over farmland and not have the local community be able to say no. Who does that help? It creates more congestion on our roads. It increases property taxes in the suburban and rural areas. It changes the character of those small towns. And it redlines our cities, because it'll always be cheaper to cut down trees and build out there than to go into the urban areas again and have to redevelop abandoned land that might have some environmental contamination. But if you allow suburban and rural communities to say no to that growth and preserve open land, the developers still want to build, then they will come back to the cities and you'll redevelop the cities with private
Mr.
capital.
McGreevey, your turn.
The difference between Mr. Schundler and myself on this issue is that I'll say no to the developers. I said yes to the state plan. Mr. Schundler won't support the state plan. The state plan simply says this: there are going to be areas that we're going to have open and keep open. And then there are also going to be areas that we target for development. The reason why the Sierra Club and the New Jersey Environmental Federation have endorsed my candidacy is because I'm willing to say no to the developers. If you think everything is going smoothly, if you think we can afford another 25 years of continued development, then respectfully vote for Mr. Schundler. But if you want a governor who's going to stand up toward ensuring that we have open space in downtowns in our neighborhoods, we preserve our quality of life, we keep New Jersey the reason for which we're here, then I respectfully ask your vote.
Your rebuttal?
Incredible. My city, you want to find the state plan in action? I support the state plan. I actually want it to get accomplished. I want cities to come back. Look at the one city in the state of New Jersey which is growing. It's Jersey City. We had 10 times as much job growth as the other 5 largest cities put together. And what I'm going to do is help all of the cities grow. And redlining them through supporting Mount Laurel is not going to help. And the reality is, if you look at what his proposals do, all they do is ultimately increase your property taxes again. All they do is congest your roads.
And our Trenton audience, and we're now going to go to NJN News' Kent St. John, who is standing by in Pomona with questions from our studio audience there.
Thank you, Kent. We will now turn to our audience and ask a question. Can you stand up, please? Can I have your name, where you're from, and your question?
Bridget Martin from Ventnor, New Jersey. As an economics major, I'm concerned that although most New Jersey residents enjoy a relatively high standard of living, there are still too many children living below the poverty level and attending inferior schools. What program initiatives can you offer to improve the quality of life for all New Jersey residents?
Mr. McGreevey, first up.
Well, it was Child magazine that evaluated major cities all across this nation. Jersey City was ranked dead last, the worst place in America for a child to be raised. I believe that the most important thing we can do is to make sure that education works. Public education. I'm committed not only to the pre-K program and the idea of using Head Start, which makes simple common sense, but also within our public schools to make sure they work with levels of accountability, increased standards for our teachers, and ensuring that every third grade child can read. But I also believe it's how we deliver health care. Right now we have more and more children enrolled in the CHIPS program, Child Health Insurance Program. My frustration is that the children enrolled in an HMO, the doctor may be 3 towns over. That doctor or that HMO is getting paid, but that child will never see that doctor. I believe in school-based health clinics. The purpose of health care for our children is to provide health care. Let's have the health care clinics right in the schools where our children are.
Mr. Schundler, your response.
We're going to help those young children. We have to help their mothers, first of all. Now, one of the things we did in Jersey City was we helped mothers have more power over their lives and over the interests of their families, so they didn't have to beg politicians to get what should be the birthright of every American. When you create school choice, what you're doing is you're allowing parents to say, give me a school that will be safe and effective, or I'm going to go somewhere else. And there's nothing wrong with us in government having to actually answer to the people, not just the rich and the powerful, but even the poor. Now, you saw 5 out of 8 housing projects in Jersey City vote for me. You saw 70% of Hispanics vote for me in Jersey City. You saw 45% of African Americans vote for me. When was the last time you heard that many African Americans and Hispanics voting for a Republican? We had the last Republican in Jersey City before the First World War. I won by the largest margin in Jersey City history because I said I was not going to have parents have to beg politicians anymore to reform the schools. I was going to give them the power to do what was right for their children. They supported me because it was worth it, knowing that they'd be able to do the very best for their children. The same thing with medical savings accounts. We try to put power in the parent's hand to choose the doctor, choose the procedure, not have some HMO tell them what doctor they can see, what procedure
And your rebuttal,
they can
Mr. McGreevey.
I respect the sincerity of Mr. Schundler on so many of these issues. I just believe that they're wrong for New Jersey. I believe his idea of taking $600 million away from public education is going to work to destroy public education. Think about why people move to a certain neighborhood or to a community. Part of that is the school they live in. My obligation, God willing, as the next governor, is to make sure that every public school works. Mr. Schundler's plan is to take $600 million away from public education and finance a private system. Nobody believes it can work.
Time is up.
It has never worked.
Time is up. I'd like to thank Ken St. John and our Pomona audience for their questions. Now back to our panel here in Newark. And Michael Aron, you're leading off in this next round. Your question to Mr. Schundler.
Mayor Schundler, you say you're personally opposed to abortion,
Right.
but you will not impose your views on the public. You'll wait for a groundswell of public support for your position. But if you win this election by a significant margin, people will say you've been given a mandate. Would you interpret a significant victory as a mandate to work for tighter restrictions on abortion?
Michael, in everything I do, I'm not talking about abortion, in everything I do, I try to make sure that I have the people supporting me when I go forward. Before that, we just talk about what are real solutions to problems and get that consensus achieved first. Now, the United States Supreme Court has established a legal right to abortion. No governor can change that. So the question to ask is, what will be the difference if I'm elected versus if he's elected governor? I will not only teach our children in school about contraception as they are learning now, but I will also stress abstinence. Because if you have children becoming sexually active at 13 or 14 years old, they're going to become pregnant. You're going to have those young children having to make a choice as to whether to have an abortion or have that child. That is a horrible choice to make. Secondly, I'll also try to end partial birth abortion, where when a baby's already outside of the mother's womb, its life is ended. Pat Moynihan and the most of our New Jersey residents, 85% of our people, see that as infanticide. They don't understand if the baby's already out of the womb, why not just put it up for adoption? But he twice voted to keep that procedure legal. And you know it has nothing to do with the mother's health.
Your response.
Let me be very, very clear. That law was unconstitutional. It was ruled unconstitutional. I want to say publicly so there's no ambiguity. I would sign a law immediately that would ban post-viability abortions of fetuses, the same way that Senator Daschle would and the same way that Senator Lieberman would. So I want to be clear on that, Mr. Schundler. But I also want to be clear that I believe choice is fundamentally a personal decision. It's a decision that I should make for a woman. It's a decision that the state or Mr. Schundler should make for a woman. On his Christian Coalition questionnaire, he said that he would ban choice even in the cases of rape and incest. He said that he would end funding to Planned Parenthood and that he would appoint pro-life judges. I believe choice is among the most personal decisions a woman can make. It's that woman's decision. It's no business of the state. It's not the appropriate review from Mr. Schundler or myself. I believe fundamentally it's a woman's decision.
Your brief rebuttal.
What I said about appointing judges was that we shouldn't use abortion, or for that matter, any other issue like that as a litmus test. We should look at whether they're going to enforce the Constitution. Now, he apparently does think it should be a litmus test. He thinks if you're pro-life, you're an extremist and you shouldn't have anything to say whatsoever. He wouldn't allow someone on the court at all. Now, I just would point out that he has said that he would support a ban on partial birth abortion if it kept the life, if it didn't hurt the health of the mother. A baby being outside of its mother's womb, letting it live, never hurts the health of a woman. So how can you justify abortion under those circumstances?
Alfred, your question goes to Mr. McGreevey.
Mayor McGreevey, a slightly lighter topic. The events of the last month have shown that easy pass or no, there's nothing easy about driving in the metropolitan area. What kind of mass transit plan would you support? And with the increased rail travel into Manhattan, particularly with the Secaucus transfer, when that's operational, would you support the building of an additional Hudson River train tunnel?
Yes. Long term, we need to have that tunnel, but that's a long-term question. I support the concept of light rail, which has been done successfully in Bergen and Hudson County, thanks to the efforts of our Senator Torricelli and also Congressman Bob Menendez. But I also believe we have to provide other opportunities, particularly the Monmouth Ocean Line, reaching into the shore community. But fundamentally, we have to get this right. We're spending more and more time in our cars, away from our families, away from our jobs. I believe we need a thoughtful statewide transportation plan. It hasn't been updated in many, many years. You know, I did 21 town meetings, and I did this walk from High Point, New Jersey in Sussex County all the way down to Cape May. Again and again, people were talking about traffic with very common sense, practical solutions. What I would do if elected governor, I would go all the way back, all 21 counties, ask people's input, and have a transportation plan that worked and put that into effect, and ensure that long-term we make the necessary investment in public transit.
Time is up. Mr. Schundler.
Folks, the only new transportation system, the only new train system in the state of New Jersey is the Hudson Bergen Light Rail, and it's almost all in Jersey City. It was built because instead of continually passing the buck and studying it forever, we got it done. If you want to get public transportation improved, you're going to have to elect someone who can get it done. Secondly, you're going to also have to have the money to pay for it. Now, he comments all the time on the fact that my proposal to decrease classroom overcrowding in our urban school districts by allowing children to fill empty seats that exist right now in privately managed schools would save $600 million. And he thinks there's something wrong with saving $600 million. He says it's taking money out of the system. It's not, Jim. It just means you have to build and staff fewer new public schools if you don't have the overcrowding because you take advantage of the seats that already exist. Now, if we save $600 million when we have the opportunity like that, staring us in the face, it means we can either lower the municipal portion of every New Jerseyans' property tax bill by 15%. How many of you would like that? That's one option.
60 seconds
It means we
is
could
up.
potentially use the money for mass transit. We could do a lot of things.
Mr. McGreevey, your rebuttal.
With all due respect, Mr. Schundler, this is vintage Schundler. Yesterday at the Gannett editorial board, he said he'd support the school construction initiative of $8.6 billion. He said that before a whole host of editors. Now today, he's going to use that same $8.6 billion to reduce property taxes or to pay for rail. With all due respect, you can say different things to different audiences. What I said is, I support the school construction initiative, period. And we need to work with federal authorities,
Your rebuttal
particularly.
time is up. So, a follow-up question.
I'd like to know what your feeling is on the rail tunnel. I
support it. I think the same point, it'll take years to build. The upfront costs will be relatively minor. It will take money and time. Most of that, 80%, I think, would come from the federal government.
Next question, Suzette, for Mr. Schundler.
Mayor Schundler, you're
Right.
a big advocate of cities.
Right.
Both you and your opponent favor some type of partnership between the state and Camden. What's unclear are the conditions of the partnership. What timetable and specific goals must Camden meet to receive the type of multi-million-dollar investment that you envision, and who will monitor the city in getting its fiscal house in order?
I think that's not the kind of structure that we would create. We would work with Camden through a partnership the same way that we did in redeveloping Martin Luther King Drive in Jersey City. Martin Luther King Drive is an area in Jersey City that was utterly abandoned by the Democrats before me. In the heart of the African American community, they allowed that drive to disgrace the name of Martin Luther King. Now, we got it redeveloped. We have $150 million which have been put into the surrounding community. We have a brand new hub site there with huge new businesses, all African American owned by people in the local area. We didn't do it by a takeover or dictating. We did it by sitting down, and from day one and every day thereafter, with our city staff, working with the individuals there, planning together what we were going to build and how we'd execute the plan. And that's what I want to be doing with Camden. Not saying, here's the conditions, then we'll come back and check on you later and maybe give you some money. What we'll be doing is working with them from day one intimately. We got an award from the American Planning Association for having the best plan in the United States for community participation.
Time is up, and Mr. McGreevey, your response.
I just asked Mr. Schundler to ask Mayor Cunningham how grateful he is for the $54 million deficit you left him. But what I believe is so important is the understanding to have the right vision. My wife and I went to services at St. John Baptist in Camden. This was last February. Pastor came out, all crusty guy. I mean that in an affectionate sense. And he came out and walked outside and he said, "Jimmy, what's this stuff all on the street?" I said, "Pastor, it's snow." He said, "When was the snow taken up, plowed in Woodbridge?" I said, 4 days ago. He goes, "What would have happened if the snow wasn't removed in Woodbridge?" I said, "I would have been hanging from the gallows." He goes, "Why is it that the people of Camden have to tolerate this?" He goes, "Most of my parishioners don't even live in Camden, but because of a biblical and a moral reason, we've stayed in Camden. We have to make Camden work." But the solution, the Whitman solution, was to cut the sales tax, as if everybody from Haddonfield or Cherry Hill was going to come rushing into Camden to shop. That's not it. We have to reduce the cost of doing business, lower the business tax, lower the property tax, provide incentives for private companies.
Please.
I wonder if Jim understands the difference between a deficit and debt. Before I was mayor, the city was required, before I was mayor, the city was required to refund improperly collected taxes from property owners. There was such a large amount of money that they had to actually bond for it. They got DCA approval to do that. That debt is still on the books. And that's what he's calling a deficit. Now, Glenn Cunningham sent out a letter to the people of Jersey City already with his first tax bill. There's no increase in the tax rate because there was no deficit, no increase necessary.
Is there a follow-up, Suzette? All right. Well, we've concluded this portion of the program. Time has gone quickly by, and we are now going to move to the closing statements from each of our candidates. That opportunity goes first to Mr. Schundler, who has 90 seconds.
Folks, the real issue here is, do you want higher taxes or do you want lower taxes? Again, I came into Jersey City, we were facing a huge deficit, and we lowered taxes. We also lowered our real debt. We do have high bond indebtedness in Jersey City. It was put there by my predecessors. And we lowered real debt. He, in his first 2 years in office, bonded to cover his deficits, and then when that no longer worked, he increased property taxes 59%. And don't be surprised by that, because he's supported every tax increase going. When he was in the legislature, he was the deciding vote for Jim Florio's sales and income tax increases, his increases on gas tax, on telephone taxes, even on toilet paper. If there was no Jim McGreevey, there wouldn't have been those increases. When the Republicans came into power, he was the only one to vote against $3.7 billion worth of gross receipts property tax relief for citizens. The only person in the entire New Jersey legislature. He also voted against your being able to deduct your property taxes from your state income tax form. Why? What does he have against you, I want to know? In 1997, he supported, again, a constitutional amendment to increase income and sales taxes. They've asked him now if he still supports that idea. He says, yes, he'll support it. He also has gone out and he said that he would not commit to not raising taxes. Well, why? Because all of his spending increases will require tax increases. This man is worse than Jim Florio. You will have the highest taxes in America. It will hurt us. Think about all the people who were out of work back in those bad old years before the Republicans came into power. They're working today, and if I'm in power,
your
they'll
90
keep
seconds
working.
is up, and Mr. McGreevey, your closing statement.
Let me just say this. On the municipal front, last election I won with 83% of the votes in Woodbridge. Let me just tell you the facts. Woodbridge, the average municipal bill is $771. Jersey City, it's $1,785. Let's look at the state aid. Last year, Woodbridge School District got $19 million. Jersey City got $311 million. And thanks to all of us here and all of us watching, we all contributed $1.2 billion to bail out a city he called distressed and to bail out a school district. And let's look at the debt limit. When Mr. Schundler came in, he was $9 million below the debt limit. Now he's $90 million above the debt limit. Most importantly, look at Moody's Investor Service. They're an objective indicator. They gave Woodbridge a AA3 bond rating, literally the top 20% in the country. They gave Jersey City the lowest 6%, one step above junk bond status. But most importantly, I'm talking about who's going to be the next governor. And I think it's long past time we have a governor who understands middle-class values. I grew up in this community. I grew up in the state. My dad was a Marine Corps drill instructor, my mom a nurse. I want to give something back to this community. I want to give something back to the state. And after looking again at the highest property taxes and the highest auto insurance, it's about having a governor with the determination, the honesty, and straightforwardness to get it done. With all due respect to Mr. Schundler, I think he has the wrong values, whether on choice, on concealed weapons, or dismantling public education. I ask for your vote.
Well, that concludes our program. And I'd like to thank both of our candidates here tonight for their participation. I'd also like to thank our panel of reporters for their questions this evening and all of the members of our audience for taking part. Underneath or above all of this noise, I'm Manahan signing off for NJN News. Thank you very much for being with us.